for those that are just signing in now, then we will get cracking in about 1 minute's time. This is Delivering Engaging Change with myself, Lee Houghton, and Mr. Garry Gormley. So we'll start in about a minute.
If you're here, introduce yourself into the chat, into those live comments. Say hello. Seen your post in there. Can you hear me? That's it. That's a useful start point, isn't it?
Yeah. Hear me now.
Hear me now.
Good stuff. Rightio. Are you good to go, Garry Gormley?
I am as good, as ready as I'll ever be.
Okay, perfect. So for those that have just joined, as I said, my name is Lee Houghton, and I'm here with Mr. Garry Gormley. We're here for the next hour to talk about delivering engaging change. If you do have a mobile phone and you've not yet connected with myself or Garry, then there's a QR code on screen. So just open your camera on your phone and then take a picture of whichever person you'd like to connect to. It's not a competition, and we don't know how many people connect with either. So just feel free to connect with whoever, myself or Garry.
And I realise, Lee, you don't actually have to press the take the picture button. You just hover it over, don't you? And it comes up with a little link to Safari. I'm still getting used to QR codes.
Yeah, no, it's well exciting. Makes it a lot easier. So that's good. Right, shall we crack on, Garry?
Let's do this.
Okay, so welcome to Delivering Engaging Change. My name is Lee Houghton and Garry Gormley is with me. What we're going to be covering in the next hour is engaging people in change, and that's what I'm going to take you through. And Mr. Gormley is going to go through how to deliver that change. But before we begin, Garry, do you want to just say who you are? A little bit like blind date test, really. What's your name and where do you come from?
Right, so I'm from Manchester, so heralding from Manchester, start with that one. And as you said, I'm Garry Gormley, so I run my own business called Fab Solutions. That's forensic about business solutions. So I tend to deal with contact centres and or shared service contact centres, and I help organisations look at process improvement, sales, service and retention, people capability, and leadership development. So really good piece of good kind of webinar to be involved in, because a lot of that involves change and engaging people through that change. So that's why I'm here today.
So I guess a question before I go into a bit about myself, which is the next slide. Why are you focusing on shared and contact centres, or shared services and contact centres?
So my background has been kind of contact centres and operational management for about probably the last 17 years. I've grown up and matured in contact centres, and I've done lots of different roles within that, in terms of I've done private medical insurance, health and wellbeing products, even done a stint in user acceptance testing for IT. So I've got a fairly well-rounded view of contact centres and shared services environments, in that we do a lot with outsourced suppliers and things like that. So for me, it was a natural movement when I set up my own business to say, right, let's focus on contact centres, because it's what I know, it's what I understand, and it's what I'm good at. And I've done an awful lot of stuff in my few years on this planet as well. So I've got a good rounded understanding of what some of the challenges are.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that, Garry. And so I guess I'm in very similar position. So my journey, when I started, so I've been an internal and external change consultant now for about 15 years. And on the screen you can see a couple of the shared service centres that I've had the pleasure of working in. So HMRC was right at the start of my change career, and then more recently engaged with Hallmark and theirs. I've also been working in contact centres. I've had the opportunity to support improvements in Virgin Media and also Hermes. But one thing that I found with all of a few things that I found with these places are there were some common themes and common challenges that the people there face. Things like that there's always a need to do more with less. There's that constant challenge, and that's one of the reasons why people set up shared services, to try to deliver more with less. So there's always that constant need and constant drive. Then there's a lot of incoming demand, which makes it difficult to change, because people prioritize the demand over the trying to make today better than yesterday, because demand, it fluctuates so much. Something else as well in this space is that technology changes so fast. So in dependence upon which organization you find yourself in, some of them the technology changes really fast, but the people themselves are sometimes forgotten about in those change initiatives and the processes that people work, because people see technology as the silver bullet, whereas what I know myself and Garry fully believe is the people that are the important part of each shared service and contact center. And that's where the focus really should be on change initiatives, because in each of the organizations that I've worked in and that Garry's worked in, they've got amazing people that have wanted to make that difference. But why is it difficult to engage people in doing? So I've had a number of conversations over the past 6 to 12 months, really, with a lot of different people in shared services and contact centers around everybody wants to make a difference. People want to improve, but not everybody is improving because of the demands that comes in. So people all say they want to do it, but they don't necessarily do it for a whole host of different reasons. Is there anything you want to say on that, Big Garry?
Yeah, you know what? I think you're absolutely spot on. I think I talk about people being the engine room and the beating heart of your business. And when I kind of look at process improvement, or when I look at training, you get people kind of saying, oh, our staff need training. We need to be better at soft skills, or we need to be better at sales performance. But actually, when you strip it right back and say, why do you need what you need? Quite often it's driven from poor process. And if you've not got the processes right, that has a knock-on effect throughout all of that customer buying journey. It has a knock-on effect in terms of that sales process and that sales journey, and indeed the retention journey. So looking after your people and making sure that you're taking them on the journey with you, I would say is probably priority number one over the actual change itself.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So as you can see, my background is primarily shared services and contact centers. When Garry introduced himself, that was very contact center centric and shared service center centric, which is why we wanted to team together. Yes, we work in different organizations. Yes, so there's Get Knowledge and there's Fab Solutions, but we're both coming from the same place, that people are so important to drive your change. So this webinar is going to be split into two parts. I'm going to look after the first bit of it, which is around the engaging people in change, and then Garry's going to take you through how to actually make change happen. If you've got any questions at any point in time, then either put them into the chat, or just send me and Garry a message at any point as well. So why do people not end up doing the do when it comes to change? Well, I think this bloke here said something really quite profound many years ago. So this was in the time before photographs were a real thing, and people were remembered in statue form. So Socrates, he said, I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. And that's what we want to do through this next 50 minutes, really, is we don't want to teach you anything. We want to make you think about what you've got going on currently in your place of work. Because ultimately, I believe that we don't make people think enough. We tell too much. And it's quite, I guess, in a one-way webinar, I guess I'm telling, and Garry's going to be telling what the important lessons that we believe are. So, but what we want to do is we want to make people think more, because ultimately, whatever you think drives the actions that follow. So, like us today, change initiatives shouldn't really be delivered like this. They should be delivered in person, and they should be there to engage people. So Socrates, when he said, I can't teach anybody anything, I can only make them think. That's what we want to do. We want to make you think a little bit about what you've got going on, how are you doing it, and is there any changes that you can make to drive that forward. Okay, but really, how do you make people think? There's a whole host of different ways. And what I want to introduce to you here is a little chart that I've knocked up that really encourages the concept of being humble. We're all in our positions as leaders, as change people, because of our skills and capability of doing something. And so one of the natural things for us to do is think that we've got all of the answers because we're in that position for that reason. But on this chart that's here, and the bottom axis is all about the perceived amount of time. And in this webinar, we've only got 1 hour to deliver it. So this is why it's delivered in this way. And if it's in the perceived interest of yourself, you're at the bottom part of it. If it's for the perceived interest of others, it's for the top part of this. So when you've got a perceived little amount of time, and it's maybe for the business or for yourself, then you tend to stick to a telling you stick to telling people things. When you've got a little bit more time and it's a little bit more mutually beneficial, you share information more freely and more readily. And then ultimately, if you believe you've got a lot of time and it's purely for the other person, then you're more curious. So because you can explore more, you can understand more from that person's perspective. Because being humble really is about having or showing a modest or low estimate of one's importance. There was a quote that I saw just the other week that said, being humble is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking about yourself less. So it's not about you're not compromising your self-esteem. It's just about thinking less of yourself and really putting the ownership and the learning into other people. There's an example I want to give, and it's say, imagine if I was driving a car now, and there was a passenger, and you're the passenger in the car, and I'm driving the car. I get to a parking space, and I want to reverse that car. You've got 4 options that you can choose. You can either go, as you're helping me reverse that car into the one and only space that's there, you get out of your seat, you move to the back of the car, and you're observing me go, and I turn my steering wheel like this because this is how I drive, and I go whoa, 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 and you go whoa, 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 go back, 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 and you're giving all of the information. You're telling me what I need to do. Another option is you can hold your hands out like this, and you can go, you've got this much space, you've got this much space, you've got this much space, to leave the ownership. So you're sharing information about how much space there is left for the driver to decide how close or how far they want to be. Another thing that you can do is go, how far do you think you've got to go to park that car? Which is really giving the ownership over to the driver, and the only way that they're going to learn is by crashing the car or asking you a question back. The fourth, I guess, and last option is you could ask the driver to get out and you could drive the car yourself. And I think those 4 examples show the 4 different types of leadership in organizations now, but there's only 2 of those examples that actually help the other person grow. And that's when you're giving them more information to share that, or it's allowing them to make all of the decisions and choices themselves. So you need to, and you can only do that to make people think, which comes back to what Socrates said, is you can't teach anybody else anything, you can only make them think, which is really important, especially when I introduce this guy to you. So this guy is, in fact, Garry, do you know who he is?
Is it Roger Bannister?
Yes, very good. Yeah, it is Roger Bannister. It's the open-mouthed Roger Bannister. So Roger Bannister is the first person to do something. He was the first person to break that 4-minute mile. But he did this because he was the only person to believe it was possible. When he was doing it in 1954, I think he was, doctors said, and the medical profession said, it was impossible to break the 4-minute mile because your body won't last and it'll do funny things to your body, and everybody said it was impossible to run the 4-minute mile, but not this fella here. He believed it was possible. So when he believed it was possible, his diet changed, his training regime changed, his mindset changed, because he was working to do that. And what was the interesting thing about in fact, Garry, do you know what happened 6 weeks after Roger broke? Oh, well, when I say Roger, I don't know him.
I reckon somebody else either matched it or beat it.
Yeah, somebody else broke the 4-minute mile 6 weeks after he did it, and since them two have done it, thousands of people have broke this 4-minute barrier that was perceived for all of these years to be impossible. Because ultimately, what you think and you believe drives what you do. So when we think about change, are you making your people think and believe that whatever it is that you're challenged to change and improve, do they believe that they can do it? Are they thinking about doing it? Or are they still got those limiting beliefs that go, nothing will change around here. We've always done it that way. So are you really challenging their thinking and helping them to see and believe that the journey that you're taking them on is a realistic one? So I guess my challenge to yourselves is really, what's your Roger Bannister moment? How can you get your teams and your people, your organisation to think and believe that this change is possible? Have you ever read a marketing book, Garry?
Yes, Russell Brunson, The Expert Success, I think it's called.
Hey, no, very good. Yeah, good. So I didn't know what answer you were going to give then, because when I've asked change people and leaders that don't work in the marketing space, the typical answer is no. They've not read marketing books or books, depends where they're from. And ultimately, I think we need to, because there's another guy that's remembered in statues, this chap, Aristotle. Because what he created, this triangle of persuasion, the triad of persuasion that marketers, they still use today. And they use it because it still resonates and it still works with people now. So this triad of persuasion is about these three things. It's about ethos, it's about pathos, and it's about logos. Those are not the three musketeers, which is what I thought they were the first time I read about them. But these really are the three things that you need to try to satisfy to persuade people to change, to persuade people and to get them to buy in and influence to deliver what you're trying to do, to make them and help them think and believe that what you're trying to do is possible. So let's go through these, shall we? So ethos is all about credibility and how much do people trust you? So one thing that I found is, so when I was an internal change person and now I'm an external change person, I found it's far easier to influence change as an external change person because I'm seen as a specialist, somebody that the business are investing in to come in and help them to improve. So it's easier because the credibility of that person and the organization is you're perceived to be more trustworthy and credible about doing that. So I think it's easier for external people than internal people to deliver change because of the credibility or perceived credibility, because they've got a business to do it. So that's the ethos and that's credibility. The next one is pathos, which is all about the heart and emotional appeal. So what's in it for the person on an emotional level? Why do they need to do what you're trying to do? Why do they need to deliver and make the change? What's important to them? And then logos is all about the head. So what's the logical reason? Why is this change better? So a couple of examples. So in terms of emotional appeal, Red Bull, they advertise. So they've got this thing about give people wings and stuff, and it's an energy drink. So their marketing team are really, really clever because what they do, they sponsor all or a large proportion of really exciting events because they want you to feel excited about their brand. So they're linking that excitement, those exciting events to their brand so that you make that link as well, that Red Bull, well, they must be exciting, it must be an exciting drink to drink, so that they're making that connection. So that's why emotion is a key factor in persuading people. So how can you create emotion in people to help them see the need for that change and want to move with you? And then Apple, in terms of logic, when they brought out the iPod or the iPhone, and so they say things like you can have 1,000 songs in your pocket. It's absolute no-brainer. Before that, it was all about Sony Walkmans, and which had a CD of a particular size. So they're playing with logic and going, actually, you can fit 1,000 songs in your pocket. So it makes it an absolute no-brainer. So when you're delivering your change, what is the logical reason and why is it better logically? So why is it better logically? Why is it better emotionally? And how can you build your credibility? How can you build your credibility so people believe and trust in you? And that's what I want to talk about now, really. How can you believe trust, or how can you build trust? Sorry. So how can you build trust? So the definition of trust is the firm belief in the reliability, the truth or ability of someone or something. So you're trying to get somebody to trust you or to deliver a change within your organization. If you think back to that humble graph that I showed a few slides ago, and we had this perceived amount of time and who's the perceived beneficiary of that interaction. There's all sorts of links in everything we're talking about today. So who are you doing this for? Are you doing it for you personally, or are you doing it for the other person? Does the other person believe you're doing it for you, or does the other person believe you're doing it for them? Okay, so that's what you need to work on. How can you demonstrate that what you're doing is for them? So that's self-orientation. And are you reliable? Are you reliable? So it's your actions that demonstrate if you're reliable or you're not reliable. Are you credible? We spoke about credibility. So, but are you credible? Do your words, does your story resonate with people? Do people believe that you are a credible person that can deliver this change or not? And then, do I know you? How do I feel about you? So this is a trust equation that was first introduced by a guy called David Meister in the year 2000 in a book called The Trusted Advisor. And what he says is, if you were to score out all these things out of 10, okay, so it was, are you reliable plus, are you credible plus, do I know you, out of 10, and then who are you doing this for, you or the other person, out of 10, then that will give you a measure of your trustworthiness. So are your actions, are your words, and are your feelings and relationships actually helping people build trust with you or not? So that's a trust equation. That's one way that I would definitely encourage you to allow you to build that ethos, that credibility. So are you reliable? Are you credible? Do I know you? Your actions, your words, your feelings. Focus on these, but ultimately be humble. It's not about you. Make it about everybody else, because that's the one important thing in this equation, because it's the one that's holding everything else up. So that's the figure that's divided by the total of the other three. So how can you make it about everybody else rather than yourself? When we talk about emotion and we talk about feelings, this is Maya Angelou. And what she said, I think, is a really important quote. She said, people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that's really important in delivering change in shared services, contact centres, with your teams, with your people. How you make them feel. So if you think about the credibility, if you think about trust, if you think about Aristotle, these things all had feelings in. And I often say it's the difference between good and great, because if you can think about X Factor, do you like X Factor, Gary?
Oh, God, now you're talking.
You weren't ready. You weren't expecting that question. On X Factor, we all love the bit on X Factor where it's the people that come on to stage and they're not very good at singing, and then you go into the group stages and then they whittle them down, and probably the arguments that you have sat at home with whoever you're watching it with is around that you might believe that somebody else was a better singer and somebody else might resonate with another singer, because it's how you feel about maybe the song that they've sung, the expression, or what their stage presence is like. Sometimes it's not the best singers that make the best artists. It's the ones that make you feel something when they sing. The best films that you watch are the ones that take you on that roller coaster of emotion. And everybody will go through emotion through your change initiatives. But but it's how you make them think and how you make them feel during it that is key. If you help them through that change curve, if you help them through that, and that you're supporting them and being humble with them, then people will see that actually you're doing it for their benefit and not your benefit. It's when people are going through this change curve all by themselves that it's a real struggle and a real challenge. So as Mayor Angelou said, people will forget what you said, and you'll probably forget a lot of this presentation today. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So what I want to just ask you now, just whilst you're listening, is have a think about your oldest childhood memory. So think back to your oldest childhood memory. And some people are able to think back to a time when they're 3, 4, 5 years old. Other people, it might be 7, 8, 9 years old. But there'll be an oldest childhood memory that's in there. And when you think about that childhood memory, can you describe maybe a smell, maybe a colour, how the room looks, the taste of something? You'll probably be able to remember some of the real detail of that memory. And that's because your brain remembers things in pictures and emotions. It doesn't remember them in words. So when Mayor Angelou said, people forget what you said, people forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. It's because your brain remembers things in pictures and in emotions. So when you're delivering change with your people, how you make them feel is a key contributor to the success of your change programs. So I would focus on what you're saying. So think back to Aristotle's Triad of Persuasion: Ethos, Pathos, Logos. Your credibility is pivotal. What can you do to demonstrate that your actions, your words, and your feelings that people feel in relationships are important? When you think about Logos and the logic, 1,000 songs in your pocket, what's the logical reason for that change to happen? And then what's the emotion? How can you help people through? Because change is individual. It's not easy for everybody, and everybody will go through it differently. So helping them go through that change, but and making it clear that actually everybody's going to go through it, and you're there for them, and you're there to help and support it, is pivotal to building trust. So that covers the 30 minutes on engaging people in change. Ultimately, it's not about tools, systems. It's not about processes. It's about people, and it's about how people think, how people feel, and ultimately getting people to do something different. So like I started off with Socrates saying, I can't teach anybody anything, I can only make them think. That's what you need to help. You need to help people think, help people believe that the change is possible, and create more Roger Bannisters that'll run that and break those targets and records for you. And if you do want to have a chat about engaging people in your change challenges, then there's another little QR code there. Whip out your phone and just hover over that, and then that'll take you.
There's going to be plenty of them today.
Yeah, plenty of QR
QR'd out by the end of it.
Yeah, you're a fan of them as well. This is exciting. Yeah, it's a 30-minute call. We'll chat about your engaging change challenges, talk about the level of trust, talk about those pathos, ethos, and logos, and how you are contributing to those for your people. So that's my bit, Garry, and it's your bit now, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought that tees it up very nicely, I think, Lee. So for me, I think when I'm looking at change and change management, I kind of think a lot about the people side of things. And what we're kind of going to cover off today is what makes good change, what experiences have there been where maybe change hasn't landed particularly well, what lessons can we learn from it. Think about some of the frameworks that we can apply to making a change, and then also probably layering on a little bit more about that people side of things, because it is a very, very crucial part. So I should be able to move on a slide here. So let's see what happens So let's talk about there we go, it's working. So in terms of how I approach change, I approach it in probably 3 ways, really. I look at the processes that sit within your organization. What is your onboarding experience like? How easy do you make doing business with you easy for the customer? And talk a lot within that about the effort that's required for customers and even your own internal people in your business, about how you kind of move some of those people through those processes. So I talk about process in terms of change in terms of process and change in terms of people as well. Lee's already talked about how significant people are in kind of helping you deliver that change. But I think when you look at people, you think of the frontline users that are going to experience that change. But then you also think of the leaders in your organization that have to kind of help support that change going through. So I talk about change in process, people, and a leadership context. And why I talk about it so much like that is because actually delivering great change delivers an absolutely awesome customer experience. But there is a technology wrapper around that. So you can see I've got that nice blue wrap around it. And technology is an enabler of change, but we can't be wholly dependent on technology doing that, because some organizations don't have the budgets to have certain technologies in there, and some organizations don't need as many technologies as you might throw at. So I kind of try and say, think about technology as an enabler rather than a crux for change. So if we think about that and then think about what change management is. So it's fairly dull when you think about it, really. What that definition of change management is, it's a way of making sure that any changes are effectively applied and maintained. And when I think about kind of that as a definition, I think actually it's much more than that. It's absolutely much more than that. It's transformation. And I think if we think about change as a transformational project or a transformational delivery, it gets us more excited about wanting to get involved in it. So when we think about change management, I want us to think about it different. I want us to think about transformational management, because that will fire us up to do a really great job and get really invested in some of that process. And there's a great quote that I always talk about. I'm a massive fan of this quote from Mark Twain, and it's continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection. And I think the biggest challenge to change sometimes is, one, the status quo, and two is we feel like everything has to be perfect before we can go and start making that change. So I want us to think about, when we're going through this presentation, is there anything that you're sat on at the moment that you're wanting to make a change, or you're wanting to discuss that change with somebody, but actually until you've fully formed it in your mind, you don't want to do it? Because that is one of the inhibitors to change, is that people just sit there and think, actually, I'm not going to do it yet until I'm really fully formed. But let's think about change in terms of continuous improvement. And it's an evolution. If you think about organizations that have made changes over time, they don't just kind of have that big bang and then they do it. Although that used to be a change methodology. When you look at kind of waterfall methods, more people are moving towards more agile methods of change. And this really kind of typifies that kind of agile explanations, to continually improving the things around you will absolutely propel your businesses forward. And I talk about being there are 2 types of change, really. And I talk about there being organizational change, and I talk about people change. And for me, I think, which one of these is harder? If I was to ask you that question there and kind of drop it into the chat and into the comments, which one of these is the harder of the 2? And if I had my vote, I would probably be saying people is the much harder change, because organizational change, it's much more systematic, it's much more transactional. Whereas actually encouraging people to change and to transform people is a much, much bigger task at hand. And it requires, like Lee said, tapping into some of those emotional states and getting people thinking about why I should be transforming. So I wanted to kind of split that down into a couple of bits, really, and think, when you look at organizational change, you're looking at really, where are you now? So we're thinking in this kind of contact center or shared services machine, how are things right now? what is it that we need to think about that are the demands of both our internal customers and the people that we seek to serve, those external customers that actually pay the bills. And what we tend to think about with that is there's something along the way. There's a journey that we need to undertake, and we need to understand what our compelling reason is for change. Because what we're doing is we're moving to the future. We're looking at where we want to get to. So organizational change is about establishing the current parameters of where you are and looking at where you want to get to. And I think that's the starting point for any change, because what that then does is it defines what we want to do for our people. And actually thinking, this is where we are now, this is where we want to get to. Why do we want to get there? Who do we then need to engage in order to get there? And there's a whole host of people that we need to really talk to and really relate to in order to be able to deliver that. And the biggest challenge that you've got isn't that organizational change. It isn't that organizational shift or that transactional change that you need to make, whether that be IT infrastructure, whether it be new technologies that you want to put in. It's the people change that is probably the biggest one, and why I think it's probably the hardest. And if you think about that for why, it's because we need to ask, where are our people right now within that mix? How open to change are they? Because actually without them, we're not going to go very far. So when we talk about the kind of the where and the to of people, we think about that in terms of why should they be bothered to change? What is that fundamental reason that they need to make that change? And I think the key thing for me is we need to think, why do they want to get there? What is it that's the compelling reason as to why they need to make that change, why they need to make that shift? And that's part of the kind of some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, kind of some of that section. And it builds a little bit about on some of Lee's points earlier. So people are the most important part of our organization. They are the beating heart, as I said earlier, as to what we can do. And they will either help our change fly, or they'll really stifle it. Because ultimately, if you don't get people on board with what you want to do, we're never going to make the change and embed the change that we'd like to do. So I want to talk about how not engaging people and not having that right infrastructure in terms of that organizational change can impact in terms of the cost of getting it wrong. And there's a really good example here from HomeServe. Lee, do you remember HomeServe?
No, I don't actually. Only from the conversation that we've had previously. So you brought this to my attention, Garry.
So this is a really good example of how not getting things right in your business can have a terrible toll on both the reputation, on the impact on your people, on the engagement of your people, on your brand. Because actually, HomeServe were fined, probably one of the biggest fines at the time, from the regulators, from the FCA, for mis-selling, and they were deduping customers into buying insurance. And this is probably all in a similar era as the same scandal back in kind of PPI. So the lens was high, but there were some really fundamental reasons as to why HomeServe got it so terribly wrong. And if we think about that and then think about how that relates to some of the change that we've got, what lessons can we take from that HomeServe example? What can we take from HomeServe, and what does it tell us about our own individual areas of change that we maybe need to focus on? So if you think about some of the things that HomeServe didn't necessarily get right, so they lacked people, culture, and engagement. And the culture within that organization at the time was one of, we need to sell. We need to kind of make more money. We need to have high pressure sales tactics to make sure that we're doing some of that that service delivery and hit some of those sales numbers. So there maybe wasn't the right kind of people focus or the culture or the right level of engagement across the organization to give them the right kind of ethos to be selling. Going back to what Lee was saying in terms of those Greek kind of namers. And then poor management oversight, or is it that the oversight was there, but it was focused on the wrong lens? So it's having that right kind of management oversight when you're going through change, or when you're approaching something that is involving a change, that allows you to really see clearly and ask yourself, what really are we doing to kind of make sure that we're doing the best for our customers? Poor behaviors were driving change. So reward schemes weren't necessarily aligned to the right customer outcomes. and people didn't necessarily think about the unintended consequences of doing things in that respect. There was some technology failing, so they weren't able to report on certain things, certain report on customer complaints that were driving issues in terms of overcharging on payments. And finally, the customer wasn't really central to their thinking. And if it was, they would have probably done things a little bit different. And the thought process for that, for change for me, is saying, actually, how do we organizationally align ourselves to some of the key failings within our organization that drive that compelling reason to change? And it all changed for HomeServe when they appointed a new CEO in the form of Greg Reed, and they completely overhauled. They made a huge transformation in their business, all around people, all around organization, all around management infrastructure, all around technology. And they made some significant advances in doing that in terms of looking at systems and controls. Missed a point. But what did they do now? So if we looked at HomeServe now as an organization, they're so much further on from where they were. So they've delivered massive transformational change within their business, and they've done it really, really well. And they've focused on things around it. They've put people at the heart, as we're talking about. And if you look at their Glassdoor rating, it's 4.3. And I think anybody on this call, if you look at your own Glassdoor rating, I challenge you all to look at your own Glassdoor rating on this call, because it's a really interesting one. And what usually happens when you say, go and look at your Glassdoor rating, the next thing I hear back is, oh, well, we were at a different space right then. So actually think about your own kind of people score at the moment. HomeServe are now delivering a 4.3 on Glassdoor, and they've been voted as one of the best places to work. They've won awards. They've got Business Transformation and Managing Change awards over the last few years, especially from the UK Employee Experience Awards. So they're actually now being heralded as somebody to look up to, somebody aspire to, an organisation that you would actually put there as a more of a first-in-class organisation. And they're hailed as one of the most improved companies for customer service, which is absolutely awesome. So I think when you think about the transformation that they've taken through, that organization could have been one that fell flat on its backside and didn't recover from some of the fines that they've got there. So it's a really interesting place to be. And their Trustpilot score is now 4.4, which again, as an organization, I think that is something really to aspire to. Out of nearly 40,000 reviews, 4.4. So that's saying that near enough 80-90% of the customers that rate them are rating them either excellent or very good. So how do we think about change, and how do we think about some of the framework that maybe then includes change? So if we have a look at some of the people that are getting it right, and what they do and how they do it, and if we think about some of the polar opposites to that in terms of the change respect, is where's Blockbuster now? Blockbuster used to be the #1 video store. They used to be on every high street, and they didn't embrace change. They didn't think about what was coming down the line and the movement of streaming. And as a consequence, they were taken over by Netflix, and they went under. I think in 2013, 2014, they went into administration. That was a $1 billion business losing their kind of competitive edge because they didn't think transformationally. They didn't think about what they needed to do. And then 5 years ago, who would have thought of Airbnb? They weren't on the map. And now they are literally in, they might not be right now because of the current situation, but they are literally in everybody's home. And they're taking over the hotel industry, and they're taking over the tourism industry. And more people are aligned to that. So if you think about the changes that organizations have gone through and the new entrants into the market, it's what's the compelling reason? Why was there a need for a Netflix? Why was there a need for an Airbnb? And that's probably one of the first things that we need to think about in our own businesses is, what is the need? What is the compelling reason for change right now? So if we think about how we kind of approach change and what the framework for organizational change should be, and some of the things that we should be thinking about when we're approaching a transformational project or something that requires us to think differently. The first question that I would ask yourself is, what is the compelling reason for change within your business? And that could be twofold. It could be driven from your customer, or it could be driven from your people and your processes. But when we're thinking about change, there's a framework that we can look at. So first of all, we need to identify the change. So we need to think about what that compelling reason is. What is the current reality, like we spoke about earlier? Where are your processes? What are you measuring right now that's suggesting that there is a need for change? And actually, it's thinking about kind of that forward-thinking approach, a bit like what Blockbuster could have done when Netflix came onto the scene. Is actually, if the world is changing and we need to embrace digital technology, how do we do that? What would we do? So think about how you think about your compelling reason for change and understand what your current reality is and where the world is moving to. Where do you want to get to? What is it that is going to kind of drive a shift in thinking for your business? And you can talk to your people about that, because the customers are telling them things all the time. Your people are a massive source of intelligence for where you want to move to for your business, because actually customers are telling them what's not right, what's not working, what other competitors are embracing that maybe you're not embracing right now. And then you need to think, is your organization is your organization ready for change? There's great appetite for change sometimes, but we go big bang. And it's, how do we think about organizationally, are we ready for change right now? And what do we need to consider before we start to make that change? And then you've got to think about, what's the detail? You've identified there is a need for change, but what is it? What's the consequence of some of the changes that you're going to make? So really mapping all these down in terms of what are the processes that you're going to think about? What's the impact on our current structure, and how are those changes going to impact, and what are the unintended consequences of some of the things that we want to do? So that's process, it's people, it's behavior. It's a massive thing that's underestimated in terms of that change adoption. And we often ask ourselves, why aren't people getting on board with this? It's because of the behavioral change that's needed. And we'll talk a little bit more about what stops some of those behavioral changes in just a minute. But there's also the risks of change. What's the potential impact of change on your customers? What's the potential impact of change on your people? What's the potential impact of change on your processes and the kind of reputational impacts and on your brand? And if that change goes wrong, what is the cost of the business? So really having that thought through detail and using people around you to kind of think through some of that detail is really, really important. And when you look at kind of how change happens, you've got all scrums, you've got operational teams, you've got subject matter experts in. So it's pulling all those people in at about this time to understand what the devil is in the detail. Then you've got the approach that you need to choose. So understanding how you're going to implement that change and who is responsible for that, who are the people that need to be accountable for delivering it, who needs to be consulted in that process, and who just needs to be informed. And I think this is one of the biggest areas, and I think Lee, I'd be interested in your thoughts on here, is to say that sometimes change is we inhibit ourselves with change because too many people think they have a decision-making process in change. Would you agree with that, Lee?
Yes, yeah, completely. I think the understanding each other's role in that change is key. But I think there's a bit of a communication part of it for me as well. So yeah, but understanding the role of everybody. But then also there's a key part on communication, because I don't think you can communicate about it enough as well.
And I'm so glad you said that, Lee, because it leads nicely onto some of the next slides. It's execute. So you've delivered, you've decided on the approach that you're going to take. Now we need to execute that change. And plan is absolutely the order of the day here. And Lee just touched on it there in terms of communication to our people, communication of training, communication of the project group that's attached to it. I think here as well, where smaller organizations get caught up, is they're using internal experts as part of that project team and not backfilling for some of that expertise. So think about the project group that needs to happen, and then think about the resource that's required for it, going back to the approach that we just talked about, and how you then become business ready for it. And what's the readiness plan that's built around that? What's the contingency plan if it all goes wrong? So it's all those things that you need to pull together to build a solid plan to make the change. But communication needs to be absolutely right at the top of that. And then once you've done that, you're then monitoring and reviewing how you've actually performed. How did it go? Post-implementation review is absolutely critical here, is to say, right, 3 months down the line, is it working as we expected it to work? Is there anything that we need to refine? So going back to that continuous improvement methodology, is there anything that's kind of born out of it that's caused a problem? Anything on a snag list that we need to look at? And what are the metrics that we actually decided to go about achieving? And are they actually making a change? And has that behavioral change that we expected from our people been delivered, and are they still in that right space? So thinking about that first point about, are you organizationally ready for change? Have we delivered that people change? Have we delivered that behavioral change that we're wanting and expected? So when you're considering change and when you're considering what to do within your business, this is kind of the framework that I would say is part of the adoption process, because change requires us to move from our comfort zone. And this is where the people bit comes in. Is your biggest enemy to change, in my view, is the status quo. It's everything right now is very, very sweet. It's very comfortable. I'm happy with it. As the salesperson, the service person, the person on the front line, or the people within your organization that have been there for a long time, they've used those systems, they've done it that way, they're used to that process. Suddenly you say, we're going to make a change, and everybody panics, everybody screams, what are we going to do? And that's because uncertainty breeds fear. So part of what our job is as leaders is to knock out some of that uncertainty and really communicate effectively with people. And actually, our job is to set that new vision for what that status quo could be. So right now, I'm thinking status quo equals happy. If I can see that the new status quo that you're about to take me to is going to fix some of the problems and some of the solutions, is going to make my life easier, it's going to stop customers complaining at me, it's going to improve the process that I'm looking to take myself through, and it's going to make my user experience better, suddenly I'm on board. Or suddenly I can see a reason why I want to go on board with that change. So change requires us to move from our comfort zone. And that's where the people part of it comes in, is that we need to think about organizationally how we engage with the hearts and minds of our people so that they're absolutely on board with that. And Lee touched on it earlier in terms of thinking about brain types and how we can kind of tap into people's emotions. People don't come into change thinking with that left-hand side of the brain all logically and happy about it, thinking, oh yes, this is going to deliver a new ROI and it's going to give us X amount of improvements in my NPS, or it's going to improve the onboarding process. They think, actually, how is this change going to affect me? How's it going to change the way that I have to work? How's it going to mean that I need to pick up new things? How's it going to mean that I need to change the way that I'm working? So we need to engage people with their hearts and minds. And there's some really key reasons for that. And it's because as people, we become immersed in what we do. We get used to what we do. We're happy with how we do it. And suddenly you make a change and you're putting me back to square one. And suddenly I'm in this box where I'm really uncomfortable. I am no longer the person that knows the system inside out. I'm no longer the person that everybody looks to because I've been here 20 years and I was there before this system came and I'm going to outlive the next system. You're suddenly in a place where you are new. Everybody is now equal. And that's a very uncomfortable place for some people to be. So if we think about why that is, and I talk about ignorance being bliss, and it really is. It's because what you don't know, you don't know. So there's 4 stages to kind of the change approach when you're thinking as an individual. And what I want to talk about here is kind of what's called the stages of learning. So at the moment, I'm happy where I am. I don't know anything's going to change. I'm unconsciously incompetent. So I don't know what I don't know. And what that essentially means is I'm in a nice state of euphoria because I'm happy doing what I'm doing. I can do it with my eyes closed. Suddenly, I'm forced to do something different and change the way that I'm thinking. I suddenly move into this box, which is conscious incompetence. And that's a very frustrating place to be as someone who's going through a change process. And this is why it's important for us as kind of change leaders or the change management process to think about how people are going through this emotional curve, because we're now introducing new ways of working. We're now suddenly saying, actually, what you were doing there isn't what we want you to do. we want you to do this. And you're aware of something, and you're aware that you're not going to be very good at it. So you can be really, really put off by that. And you start to evolve your thinking, and you continue to move people through that process. And this is where good training, good development, good communication comes in, because I start to think about, right, I can do it, but I really need to think about it. So there's your epic thinking phase. I really need to apply myself as I'm doing it. And again, it's still an uncomfortable space, because a few months ago, everybody came to me for it, but now I'm having to go to the new person. And for people who've been in our organizations that have got great tenure and might be a little bit older, they might be a little bit uncomfortable going to the new person who's like, oh yeah, I can do this, it's dead easy, and are adapting it dead quickly, because they're no longer the gurus and they're no longer those subject matter experts. But our job is to get them to a stage where they're unconsciously competent. So they're back into that blissful state where they can do stuff and they can do it without thinking. And Lee talked about the change curve earlier. And what I've done is to kind of illustrate the point that I've made, is I've tried to kind of say, right, actually, let's look at where people are within that kind of process. And you've got Mount Stupid there, which is kind of the height of that unconscious incompetence. Is actually, I know I'm singing, I'm all dancing, and I'm right at the top of that curve. And that's because I'm unconsciously incompetent on anything that you're about to throw at me. I've got that, my confidence levels are high because I feel like I'm in a good space. I know what I'm doing. And then you start to move your people through that kind of change process, and suddenly they're consciously incompetent and they're suddenly feeling really low. They're in that valley of despair. And our job is, again, to kind of boost them through. So then they become consciously competent, and we're taking them through that enlightenment process, and we're giving them the tools that they need. We're giving them the communication. We're giving them the training that they need to get them into that plateau of sustainability where they become consciously competent again. And I think when we're talking to our people, this is a really great example to use to say, this is how you're going to feel. And actually, awareness is sometimes something that you can forearm yourself by saying, we're going to go through a process. Everybody's going to feel the same. This is probably how you're going to feel. How can I help you not feel that way? What is it that I need to do as leader to make you feel better? And this is what we need to do. We need to take time out so we can engage people. So how do we engage people? We take them to the pub. And I don't mean figuratively take them to the pub. But what I'm going to talk about now is kind of some of the things that we can do as part of our role within change to make sure that people do that. So we need to really articulate what the purpose is. You can see where I'm going with here as an acronym. What the purpose is of the change. What is their role within change? What is their function within that process? What do we expect them to do? What's the purpose of the organization? And how is that organizational purpose changing so that we can really clearly bring the what's in it for them? We can really attach them to the why of why we're making that change. And then we need to make sure that they understand that. It's not enough to tell them we're going to go through change. It's getting them to understand and be able to relate the change and the aspect of change to their role and what they're going to achieve from it. And then next, we need to build momentum. So this is all about desire. It's all about creating that fire in your team's belly, within the change projects team's belly, within your frontline team's belly, and kind of saying, how do we actually start to build that kind of new vision of what that status quo was, as I mentioned earlier? How do you create that new nirvana that's going to help them actually want to get to that point quicker? And then finally, we need to step into action. And that action is execution of the project. It's execution of the communication that sits behind that. It's the execution of the project delivery itself, and making sure that that whole cycle is closed loop. So actually, as we are making that change, we're taking action and we're closing the loop, and we're keeping people informed and taking them on the journey. And that helps us build that momentum as we go across the process. And as I mentioned earlier, the whole point of having fear and uncertainty within the process is because we don't communicate. So as we go through it, we take them to the pub, but we're clear, concise, and we're communicative about the changes that we're going to make. So taking the guys to the pub, but now we need to kind of continue to take them on that journey. So 3 ways that I suggest that you can get ahead with your change program. First of all, build change champions. These are advocates within the business that are very pro change, very keen to kind of do something different. I would advocate that some of those change champions become some of your change assassins, maybe. People who might be more likely to resist change. How can you make them become a change champion so that those people that are a bit anti-change are actually then the people that are all singing and dancing at the end of it? And sometimes the go-to experts or the SMEs, the subject matter experts, are really great people to become those change ambassadors for you. But use your subject matter experts in your change program. Because for me, they understand the process, they understand the current reality, and then can translate more easily to what the new reality needs to be. But it can also challenge us in terms of that thinking and say, have you thought about this process? Or customers quite often say this, or actually internally we do that, and that process leads on to this. So have you thought about that? They can give you that holistic view of what that program is. And then lastly, it's not enough to communicate. We need to have a communications program. So somebody needs to own what, when, how, and why we're communicating that, and make it interactive. Build things like, you've got town halls, you've got regular newsletters, you've got regular kind of news feeds that are coming out. You might be putting it on your notice board at work, or it might be in your internal newsletter. So what is the communication program that is going to help create that fire in people's belly and help them see that status quo evolving? So if I was to summarize how you can make effective change within your organization, I say, first of all, engage people's hearts. Then establish that compelling reason for change, that need for change that will give them the spark to say, I'm on board with this. Role advocates within your business. So use those change champions, use those subject matter experts to kind of help you take you on the journey. Assess people's ability as you go through to understand those knowledge gaps, understand those people impacts, understand those training impacts, and engage early so that you can really start to finesse and build what that new kind of change program is going to be. So we can ease people through those 4 stages of learning. So that move from unconsciously incompetent and consciously incompetent isn't as steep. And then give back. When I talk about giving back, that's giving back in terms of the communication. Make sure people are aware, make sure you're taking people on that journey. And then lastly, as I said in one of the first slides, continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection. So be that continuous improvement agent, evaluate and review and make the changes that you need to. And that actually spells out engage for those that are observant. And here we are, we're talking about engage with change. That is, for me, is absolutely the 5 or 6 things you can do to drive engaging change. That's been me in terms of what I've got to offer in terms of how to drive some of that change and how to keep your people on board as you go through some of that change. A couple of dates for people's diaries for the contact center and shared services network. You can join on the 23rd of July, where we're going to have some really great speakers from the Voice of the Customer program. So Sabio, Ipsos Mori, and Cupid will be joining us for that. And then the contact center network on the 27th of August, where we'll be focusing on operational excellence and what we can do in organizations to maintain high levels of operational excellence and productivity. You can also scan me here, which will take you to the contact center network and shared services survey. And that's just a survey on you can do to kind of get an operational effectiveness score for your business. So if you want to think about how you can make some changes in your business and some of the priority items that are in your organization that might need change, that can help you get a bit of an insight into some of the areas within your environment that might not be working. But thank you very much for listening. I've been Garry Gormley, Fab Solutions.
Perfect. Thanks very much for that, Garry. Much appreciated. So I guess just to summarize, change is all about people ultimately. And it starts with the people and it ends with the people. There was a comment that came through from Gordon, who said, build trust by still being visible and supportive once the change has been delivered. It's a key behavior. And I think that everything we spoke about, the communication, the trust, humility, these change, they're not one-off activities. It's called continuous improvement for a reason. because it is all about it happening. It's not one-off. So trust is not one-off. Being humble is not one-off. Continuous improvement is not one-off. These are the habits and behaviours that determine the success of your transformational programs.
Like we did there, Lee. Transformational. It's not change. It's transformation.
Correct. It's because I was listening to you, Garry.
Thanks.
So I guess just from my perspective, I'd just like to say thanks very much for your time and taking the opportunity to observe this webinar with myself and Mr. Gormley. If you've not yet connected with us, then those are the QR codes though to connect with us. And I'm sure if anybody has any questions or anything that they want, then they can just reach out to either of us. You all right, Garry?
Very happy with that. If anybody wants to chat with me, just drop me. LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me.
Amazing. Right, Garry, have an amazing afternoon, and everybody else, look after yourself.
I enjoyed that. I'll speak to you all again later. Take care. Bye bye.